Okay, I think we're here. So welcome everyone. I'm Jane Thornthwaite, the MLA for North Vancouver Seymour and the opposition critic for mental health and addictions. And I'm really proud and excited that I've got some experts in the field of mental health and addictions that are with me this evening to talk about how we can cope in these COVID days. I've heard a lot of stress and anxiety and worry about people that this is all new, and people are worried about, some people are worried about their jobs, their school, their family, their businesses, all sorts of things. And so I thought that it would be kind of a good idea for me to host some experts. So I'm going to introduce them, and then we're going to ask some questions. You can ask your own questions live. You can see, you can text us or email us in the information below. And then at the end, I'm going to make sure that their contacts, my experts' contacts, are available for you. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Julia Keisler. She's, for the last 3 years, has led the Canadian Mental Health Association Northwest Vancouver branch in the role of executive director. Despite the long hours, she believes it has been a privilege to work across communities that care so deeply about their mental well-being of people. And the North Vancouver, West Vancouver branch provides low-cost counseling, peer support and navigation, mental health, housing, homeless outreach services, employment support, and training. And while the focus will continue to include the North Shore, Julia is committed to reaching across the Sunshine Coast and Central Coast region to provide needed services. And before her work at a branch level, Julia worked at the provincial office of the Canadian Mental Health Association. And prior to that, she honed her skills in communications and community relations working for Pacific Blue Cross. Julia has an MA in conflict analysis and BA in political science. When she's not working, Julia is watching her two boys play baseball or getting walked by her 100-pound Bernese Mountain Dog, which I'm sure you're doing a lot of that these days, Julia. So how are you doing, Julia?
I'm doing okay. Yes. I'm trying to take all the advice I'm hopefully going to give everyone else.
All right, good. So our next guest is Keir McDonald. Keir is the Chief Executive Officer of the Phoenix Society, an innovative multi-service agency dedicated to providing accessible services and opportunities to people who face barriers related to addiction, mental health, and homelessness. Phoenix offers services to a diverse range of residential substance use services, housing, and employment programs. And after close to 10 years working legal practice in Australia and later with BC Housing, Keir found his calling when he moved into the charitable sector in 2016. And prior to joining the Phoenix Society, Keir helped lead one of British Columbia's largest social service agencies, the Lookout Housing and Health Society, where he held the position of Deputy Executive Director and later Chief Operating Officer. For the past 5 years, Keir's work has focused on responding to Canada's opioid crisis, and Keir is a graduate of the Australian National University, where he holds a Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Law, and a graduate diploma of legal practice. Recently, Keir also completed his Master's of Business Administration at Simon Fraser University. Keir is a passionate advocate for society's most vulnerable and striving to create a true continuum of care and finding hope for people suffering from mental illness and addictions. Welcome, Keir. How are you doing?
Yeah, I think the word okay sums it up. There's been a lot of adjustments over the last month, but yeah, we're beginning to adapt, and like Julia said, I think we're all trying to heed some of the advice that we're sharing with others right now.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you all spending the time. So my next guest is Andrea Paquette. Andrea is the president and co-founder of the Stigma-Free Society. The Stigma-Free Society has been delivering educational program to youth in schools for 10 plus years. Andrea leads the nonprofit with a service delivery model focused on mental health education that serves all ages with the focus on the elimination of stigma. Andrea is passionate about educating all people about mental health, as she has been diagnosed since 2005 with bipolar disorder. She embraces her role as society president and also acts as a well-known spokesperson, having shared her lived experience and mental health experience internationally. She's an award-winning mental health activist, educator, speaker, and published author, and also received the President's Commendation from the Canadian Psychiatric Association in 2019. Andrea has been widely recognized for her work in mental health throughout the years, but her true passion is bringing hope to those who struggle deeply with their challenges, especially youth. Welcome, Andrea, and how are you doing?
Hi, Jane. Thank you so much for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure, and I am doing okay, and I'm really looking forward to today.
Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you to Johnny Morris, the CEO of the Canadian Mental Health Association, for recommending all of you, and I'm sure he's watching along. So I have some specific questions for all of you. I'll start off with Julia, and certainly Nick, my assistant, will let me know if there's any other questions that are coming through. So Julia, what are some ways adults can address their mental health needs?
I think this is, it's top of mind for a lot of us as we're trying to stay well and healthy for our work and our communities and our children and our parents. I think we've heard a lot of these lists. I'll go through some of the key pieces, but I think it's really around the key points about how to stay healthy. So you need to eat healthy, eat well. You want to try and get outside. I think that the whole concept of forest bathing, sometimes you don't have to push yourself to go for a run or move too much outside, just stand outside for a little while. I think that's often really helpful. Sleep. I think it's never been more important to ensure that we're getting good sleep. And I think sleep hygiene, does involve turning off technology, turning off the news, trying to stay quiet at certain points of the day. I've started a new process where I force myself to be quiet by myself for 15 minutes a day. And whether you're meditating or whatnot, I think that is a way of slowing things down and preparing yourself to have a good night's rest. I think one of the key pieces I'm hearing from parents and from others is just around the guilt that we all feel that we're not doing more, for our children in particular. Like often when we're trying to play multiple roles, we see some of our kids struggling and we just keep thinking, I wish I had more time. I wish I could help them. I think just being kind to yourself and letting go of some of that guilt is really key. And if you do have energy and you do have time, I think one of the other key pieces is really around volunteering and giving back in some way. Mm-hmm. At the Canadian Mental Health Association, at our branch here in North Vancouver, we've seen a doubling of volunteers in the last 3 months. So wow. I have to really commend the community for showing up. And I think it's helping them as much as it's helping us and our clients.
That's really good to know because, with the volunteers, because we really need them. And yeah, that's good. So what sort of services and programs does the Canadian Mental Health Association offer during specifically COVID? Obviously, I've checked out your website, yes. But virtually or over the phone, or tell us what you provide.
For sure. I think a couple of weeks ago, the government announced $5 million of funding to mental health. And and I know a lot of that builds on the work that you did, Jane, when you were in government with the Foundry sites and really starting to enhance the services through Foundry for families and for youth. I know that on the North Shore in particular, there'll be a new parent support group starting. And I think connecting to those groups, they're not just for everyone else. They're not just for all of the people that are unwell. They're for all of us. So I really encourage people to access the CMHA websites across the province to connect with those groups. We on the North Shore, we're offering groups around gardening and pet therapy. Who would think that, watching a little puppy on screen, it's not the same as maybe interacting with them, but it has actually been very helpful and people love it. So connecting with those groups that are online and are offered virtually is a wonderful starting point. For those of us that need a little bit of one-on-one support, there are different options across the province. So One of them is around peer support. So peer and peer navigation, just connecting with someone one-on-one and to hear that you're not alone. This is obviously a huge part of the recovery movement. I'm sure we'll hear about it from Keir too, but I think just having a one-to-one connection with another human being and being able to speak freely is a key part of this. So we are offering virtual peer support, and the Foundry sites are as well. And then for those of us that need a little bit more, CMHA has been providing the Bounce Back program for a very long time, and Dr. Henry has referenced it multiple times, to go to the bouncebackbc.ca website, and the CMHA website's all linked to that site. They can access a coach and work through some of the challenges and the problems that they're facing. And if they need a little bit more, there are a multitude of organizations now offering free or low-cost counseling. It includes CMHA. It also includes Family Services of the North Shore and other agencies provincially. So I would really encourage people to get the support when they feel like they need it, and to start reaching out so that you can set up those sessions and stay well throughout the next couple of months, whatever they might look like.
That's really helpful. And yeah, I was pleased to see that the government did announce the 5 million. And certainly I've been, as you know, a huge advocate of Foundry. And so they're expanding their counseling services, obviously, and everybody's stepping up like yourself, and helping people, to do whatever we can virtually. So I have a question for Keir. How are those in recovery being impacted by COVID, and what other mental health and substance use services are available for people in need?
Yeah, so I guess much like Julia's touched on, it's everyone is being impacted in some way. We're feeling stressed, a little anxious, and quite frankly overwhelmed. And those in recovery are definitely feeling those same feelings. People have lost jobs, they're working from home, perhaps trying to juggle duties of working from home whilst parenting, or just working in different places. And there's others that are, those still going to work have been taking on maybe a higher risk environment. So whether that's our healthcare workers, first responders, even cashiers, it's just all adding stress to our lives. And those in recovery, it could be newly in recovery in a program, or quite frankly out in community, just like all of us, going about our lives and trying to juggle as best we can. We've been in this for 5 or 6 weeks now, and the extended isolation is definitely taking its toll. We see this mostly in housing and in alumni living in community. People aren't used to spending so much time in their homes. We are used to being connected with one another, and it's definitely this isolation is particularly causing problems. We often also forget that COVID is the latest public health emergency. We have had one raging for over 4 years now with the opioid crisis. Combine that with an affordable housing crisis, and we really have got a perfect storm of these situations that are really impacting some of the most vulnerable. It has been fortunate that government and social services agencies have stepped up, and we'll hear a few of those services today to respond to the need. I think there's a lot of people that just don't know about all these extra services that are coming online. And so we're doing our best to sort of promote the new channels where people can access help. There's really supports for everyone, and also specified supports for our healthcare workers, our youth, students, parents, seniors, Indigenous persons, and those in recovery. And whether you're in recovery or not, there really is, like Julia talked about, just things we should all be doing to take care of ourselves, and whether that's trying to eat well, exercise, getting enough sleep, but staying connected and with family and friends. Those in recovery, isolation, as I mentioned, is one of the biggest challenges, and so where you don't have your normal outlets, when you're not able to necessarily spend physical time with one another, trying to find other ways to connect, whether that's by phone, FaceTime, again getting online, ways like this that we're trying to adapt to. Again, trying to cut back a little bit on the social media. I myself has been guilty, and I think the first 2 weeks of this was, like many, feeling a little bit overwhelmed and hard to switch off. It was just constant coming at you information, and we couldn't break. We couldn't get away. We couldn't shut down overnight. There was just so much information. But so it's really important to sort of share those, explore those self-management and those coping strategies. Julia and Andrew will be talking about some of the ones that they're doing. There's been some other great services, particularly on the recovery side, the Mindshift app, and being able to sort of look at CBT and these cognitive behavioural therapy, and again, these are just from the use of an app. And I think it's Anxiety Canada, for instance, that has that service. For many in recovery, it's been virtual meetings, and looking like the AA and the 12-step community. Many of those have moved online to Zoom. And most attending those meetings are still very excited to see the familiar faces. But for newcomers or those newly in recovery, it can be challenging. You don't have that personal rapport yet. And the meetings for people that are not as close to or known to you can be a little bit harder to establish that first connection. So really what we're sort of targeting is trying to find ways to maintain that human closeness, especially for those in early recovery, that it can be lacking sometimes in a video conference. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that a lot of the groups are doing virtual, kind of like what we're doing. But yeah, and a lot of the recovery facilities also are, I don't know, maybe you could confirm this, are not receiving intakes. So there is probably going to be a pent up demand as well.
Yeah, so I think every facility's kind of been given some leeway in terms of how many and if they're continuing to take intakes. I know it was a big challenge for us. We were almost full when this occurred, and 98% to 100% occupancy. What some of the key risks for programs were, there was no space to self-isolate. There was no space if we had someone that was symptomatic or COVID positive to actually safely, live in our program. So many wanted to actually reduce occupancy, unfortunately, before they could even consider taking in new people. So I think we've moved through that first wave of many people having to sort of suspend intakes, but I've definitely heard across community as well that many have ceased intakes, and that, as you say, has led to a bit of a build-up in demand.
Yeah, and it's only going to get worse, I would assume. I have one more question for you before we go on to Andrea. What is the Phoenix Society doing to support people in your program?
Yeah, I mean, when this first hit, our immediate priority, like many, was really to keep staff and all of our clients and residents safe. All of our programs were deemed essential services, so we had to find ways to continue to operate. And we have 60 licensed residential addiction treatment beds, and over 100 supportive housing units, plus other harm reduction, outreach, and employment services. So really trying, each one of those programs really face different challenges to continue operations. Our biggest focus and probably concern was our main campus, where we have over 140 people, and many of those living in a shared living environment and congregate type of in recovery environment, where sometimes as many as 14 people were on a floor and sharing washrooms and those kind of things. So again, we were one of those that really had to take stock of how we could safely continue to operate. It really has created unique challenges, for many of our groups, and has painfully exacerbated existing medical conditions, and for those in recovery as well. But for those fighting addiction, it's been really scary. The collapse of normal support structures has made it difficult, for building and sustaining those new habits and patterns, and that community and connection that most people had. So really for us, I mean, immediately was, we established a pandemic committee, and we implemented changes to, things like cleaning and, physical distancing, meal services. But the stuff that became a little bit more complicated was, as I mentioned earlier, how to reduce occupancy and create space for self-isolation where required. How do we conduct meetings? So much about recovery is people coming together. And that's usually in close proximity and physical connection and things like that. And so, again, how did we modify when we couldn't hold our, even our community meetings on site every night? We unfortunately had to close our doors for visitors, and some of our buildings were under, public health directives as we were licensed. So, there were people, our alumni, that could no longer come back and get the support that they needed. So we had to find new ways to reach them. And technology, again, has been, I guess, we've all been exploring the power of technology, and really trying to find ways to maintain community and connection, despite the fact that we're trying to practice physical distancing and self-isolation, and it's kind of a little bit of an oxymoron in itself, but that's the challenge. It's community and connection really is the backbone of what we do at Phoenix, and we believe that the opposite of addiction is connection, and trying to promote community involvement still, despite some of these limitations that we have. So business does still go on. Operations have continued, but we've made the modifications in terms of, the proximity of how closely people gather. Meal services again have to continue, but again have had to be spaced out, and really, extended meal times, less people in cafeterias and stuff like that. But housing really has been a key area for us to. That door, the fact that you can close your door at night, the isolation, again, those risks of overdose and lapse, the stresses that have been on people. Really, we've been getting around our people in housing in particular, and our alumni and community, because we found people on the floors in the addiction programs are actually faring quite well. They've got really good support. They're still meeting regularly. They've got their peers, and they've got the ability to connect daily. But there's something about closing the door at night that leads to isolation that has really forced us to have to tackle that and just find different ways to connect with people.
Yeah, and I guess it's balance, because you're connecting via being on social media and screen time, and at the same time trying to, get away from screen time because it becomes stressful. So all of that is a real balance. Well, we'll come back to that, but I wanted to ask Andrea a couple of questions. So Andrea, tell me what the Stigma-Free Society is doing for youth mental health during this time.
Yeah, our Stigma-Free Society has always been based in the last 10 years since we founded it in 2010 on education, and mainly in schools. So schools aren't in right now, and we decided we needed to remain adaptable, yes, as a society, but we also wanted to stay relevant for our young people and bring them the education and the mental wellness tools that they need, and to do it online in an environment where they can access it with their parents, with their educators. So at stigmafreetoolkit.com, it's an amazing resource we've developed in 2 weeks. We're a very small organization. We did have some seed funding from the Richardson Family Fund, which we are very grateful for. With this beautiful program, I managed to team up with Dr. Dana Wasserman, who is a psychologist here in Vancouver, mental health experts, a youth counselor, Lindsay Sarah, as well as some of my staff, and a 22-year-old young girl named Maddie, who is absolutely amazing. It's been bringing that nice youth lens into our toolkit. So just to add a couple little things about the toolkit, if you come and visit, there's a welcome message there, just explaining what it is all about. We have various sections, and it's all dedicated to COVID-19. So this toolkit is basically a great hub for various information. It's very robust. We're funneling in new information every day, from downloadable resources for educators and parents and youth, 10 tips for managing your anxiety, all the way to tips for managing your mental health, illustrated animations, and even a cartoon for young people. And this cartoon is really great because it talks about the negative ways that we can look at COVID-19 and the things that are expected of us, like physical distancing, etc. Or how could we look at it in a positive light, in a way that's reframing the negative? So I really do hope people will check out our toolkit. There's also a parent resource section too. Lastly, some conversation cards. With these conversation cards, it ignites real talk with young people and their families. And we're just super excited to bring this resource. City TV did a big news story on it, which was very exciting. Surrey School District is piloting it to its entire district as of yesterday. We're looking for feedback. We don't have it all figured out, but we want to make a difference.
So that's really good to know. I mean, for those of you watching, I was fortunate to be able to ask or to witness Andrea in one of her sessions at Argyle School in North Vancouver. And I think what's really important is your personal experience as well, Andrea, that kids really can appreciate and feel like they can, talk to you more personally because you share your personal situation. One other question is, anything else that you'd like to share to young people who might be struggling right now today because they're not in school, and so they're away from their friends, they're away from their normal school life. They might have, you know, closeness with teachers and certainly classrooms and certainly some subjects, and they're not there. And they might, you know, kids will have varying degrees of supports with parents. And what would you say to them to help them in their coping?
A lot of things I'd like to say to young people. It's been my passion to reach out to young people. My first presentation that I ever gave was to 15 students in grade 10 in Victoria. Now I've reached 35,000, but it's not just me. We have stories on this toolkit about people facing various stigmas. It's not just about mental health. It's also the challenges we face when somebody has autism or if they have a physical disability. Wellness is for everybody. And so our toolkit, yes, it does focus on mental health in a lot of capacities, but we also bring up discussions around mental wellness as a whole. As for young people, I can't imagine how tough it is for so many people, but please keep your head up, try to stay optimistic. And I always say, and especially my toolkit, in the explaining it all basics of COVID illustrated animation you can find on there as well, this is a temporary situation. It is just something that we will need to get through together. And at the Stigma Free Society, we're here for you.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Bonnie Henry says that on a regular basis. It's not forever, it's just for now. And we don't really know how long it is for now, but everybody's going to have to try and adapt, be it school or at work or certainly in your family situation. But that's why we've got you all three here just to help us with the coping. So I've got a few questions that have come in. So how do you see, I guess this is for Keir, how do you see the recovery community moving forward? Not just helping the people in the downtown east side, but in supporting 2 public health crises for the next year?
Sorry, I've been having a little bit of technical challenge in a stable line, but I caught the end of that question, Jane. Was that for me? I missed the first part.
Yeah, so the question that came in, I'm assuming it's for you, because it says, how do you see the recovery community moving forward, not just helping the downtown east side, but in supporting 2 public health crises for the next year?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I mentioned earlier. I mean, we have so many complex conditions coming together. It's if there wasn't enough challenge already for those that use substances, it's even more pronounced right now, whether you can be safely housed or not. For those in recovery, I guess the biggest challenge right now is simply accessing service. As we discussed earlier, there are limitations on getting into new programs, and the longer we continue under these restrictions, many are having to run at reduced occupancy levels. And as we've previously discussed ourselves, Jane, I mean, there are pressures already on the system. We don't have a continuum of care right now that when you need help, that happens necessarily immediately. So, there's definitely going to be an impact on the ability to access care, or care might be we might have to find different ways to access care. Perhaps that's more outpatient services in a first instance, but that's an immediate strain. I think as we move forward, what we're seeing is the pressure on the housing system is one of the biggest. And so, for folks entering recovery, a biggest part of stabilizing that is having a safe place to live and to be. It's near impossible for anyone to seek a life of recovery and sustain that if you don't have adequate, safe and stable housing. So much of the work that we've been focusing on, as a community and society over the last few years, we really can't have things like more affordable housing quick enough. And again, hopefully we move through some of these pressures around the COVID pandemic. We understand it's going to be some months, but it's not a quick solution. And I think there's things, unfortunately, as we're seeing with the spike in overdoses and even unfortunately some loss of lives more recently that's already been reported in the last month. Things may unfortunately get a little bit worse before they get better, and we've got to do everything we can to keep people safe right now. And that's part of this effort to stay connected, to access, you know, safe supply of drugs. You know, so it's definitely a complex challenge, and it's going to take a lot of people working very hard to work on solutions for that.
Yeah, one of the facilities that I had talked to said that because of this intake issue that I was referring to, that their beds, the number of beds, because obviously not all of them are publicly funded, it's not full. So there are beds available. It's just that they're not getting funded, and the issue was getting compounded because a lot of times, if it's a young person in their 20s, it's the parents that are actually paying for the recovery. But if the parents are now lost their job and aren't in the same financial situation that they might have been even 3 months ago, then their ability to pay for the regular beds, the non-funded beds, is becoming more difficult. So I guess what I've been advocating, and I guess the situation hasn't changed at all, it's probably worse, is that we've got all these beds available, we just need to bump up the funding for those beds. Another question I had specific to children again, or youth, and this would be for Andrea or guest Julia, because Julia, you did talk about Foundry. What advice can you give parents about talking to their kids about mental health right now?
I can talk on that if you'd like.
Okay.
One thing I really want to iterate about the Stigma-Free Toolkit, what that is right now is our biggest resource for COVID-19 and specific to the issues that young people are going to be facing and dealing with. And one of the benefits, as I mentioned before, how do you talk to your young people? This toolkit is exactly what that is about, because with our youth activities and our parent resources, and I mentioned the conversation cards, I'll just explain that a little bit. It's a great resource where parents ask their children a question, and it's all related to COVID-19. What is this virus? The facts. What can I do? Why do I have to social distance? All of these things where the children can ask and then the parents can ask. And on the website, you can scroll over and hover over and it flips. And so this is a great way at Stigma Free to truly just get the conversation going in an ignited and fun way, because it's pretty heavy when you can talk to your young person, your child, and be like, so how you doing today? And they're not going to say much. But if you have, do you agree, Jane?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So Julia, you mentioned the bounce back, and I've had lots of comments about bounce back, all good. And people have actually gone there and tried it, and it's really helped. Could you tell the folks that might be watching what exactly is the bounce back?
Yes, so it's a program we've been running for quite a long time in BC and is now getting picked up across the country. And it really is, we're training coaches based on CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy, to work with individuals over the course of however number of weeks the coaches determine is necessary, by phone in multiple languages. We offer it in multiple languages here in BC. So you can get a referral through your doctor and you will be able to self-refer. So I encourage people to go to the website. There is a video, a video that people can watch to learn a little bit more about the program. And, you know, it just really helps. It's based on what we know works in terms of helping people to understand their own behaviors and the layers beneath that so that they can change the outcomes in their lives. So it's been well researched yeah, and I think it has a lot of benefit for young people and for adults as well.
Well, can you just give a little bit of a discussion as to what CBT is?
Oh, so cognitive behavioral, oh, Grace. I am not a clinician, so we will do our best here. But, you know, okay, let me give my own example. So I am also, I see a counselor, which I've been doing for the last little while. And, you know, sometimes I'm repeatedly, you know, engaging in thought patterns that are not based in reality. Like I might be sitting in a room and thinking someone's judging me, or thinking that someone's responding to me in a negative way. And those are all of the thoughts that are underlying my next behaviors. So it really helps me to understand what are the layers underneath that. So what are the what are the thought patterns that I need to be more aware of? And so then I can change my behavior and change the next step or the next experience that I have in that situation. So I think it's really around self-reflection. So,
right. So what would be the difference between that and mindfulness?
I think it's guided. I mean, I think mindfulness can often be guided, but mindfulness is often something that you can become aware of and learn on your own. I think the benefit of working with a coach or with a counselor around CBT is that they will help ask questions to uncover that, and they will provide through the Bounce Back program materials that you can work on and worksheets and things that you can read so that you can start to write things out and really process them in a different kind of way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, there are all these services or, names and everything that's out there that people don't necessarily know, but it's good to have those tools actually on the website to be able to lead them through it, because it's overwhelming. Here, have we found you, or I know that you're not.
I'm coming in and out. I hear you right now, but yeah, I'm having some troubles with the line. Unfortunately, part of this challenge in connecting remotely right now.
So do you want, while we have you, do you want to just add to anything, or maybe give us, so you're coming now twice now.
I'm going to try.
There's two peers.
Now you've doubled yourself.
I'm going to get out of. There we go.
Okay. Oh, say now you've changed it. See, this is what technology and live stuff is all about.
It's fun though.
We're showing how we cope, right?
From one device to the next, yeah.
Right. So before we lose you again, unless you think you're going to be, perhaps you could maybe just give us something else. Like, we haven't covered everything with regards to addiction, but I'd like the focus also to be on those, say, who are living in the suburbs, say that are living in the North Shore, say that are really struggling with maybe substance use. We've heard that prescription meds have gone up. We've heard that the sale of alcohol has gone up. We've heard that people are cooped up at home, they're extra stressed. What would you say to folks on how to get a handle on maybe knowing the difference between substance use and substance abuse, or whatever? Is he there? Did you get that, Kira?
Yeah, I did. I apologize. I keep coming in and out, but no, in terms of strategies for people that, again, are at home, again, probably one of the tougher places to be right now, because you've got all these other pressures on you, and whether that's, again, whether you're currently using substance or you're trying to pursue a life of recovery, it's just the weight of these extra stresses is definitely causing some problems for people. And we have heard across communities that there has been a little bit more of a spike in lapse and people relapse and people starting to use again. So really, it's so important to just get connected. And I know we keep all, reinforcing that message, but it's, if we can't do the traditional channels, it's at least starting by asking for help. Whether that's loved ones, whether that's, there's plenty of free mental health and supports available right now, outpatient supports. So it starts by acknowledging that, we need some help and connecting with someone. And it may not be the usual channel, but it's getting connected, it's starting to talk about it. And it's the worst thing people can do is continue to isolate and ignore the signs or the symptoms and the feelings that they're experiencing.
Yeah, I guess that is the first thing, is reaching out, right? I mean, we're talking about this even 5 years ago when I first started my career in being, what was I then? A parliamentary secretary of a child mental health, and also the chair of the Select Standing Committee for Children and Youth. When I first started, people weren't talking as much about their mental health as they are now. So that's good. And so we were reducing the stigma, by doing these types of forums, and hopefully encouraging people that if they do have an issue or they do feel like they need some help, that there is help out there. And you three have definitely indicated that there is help out there.
Jane, could I just mention something practical about connection quickly? Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay, just quickly. When you're talking about connection, I just want to offer like a quick practical way to connect. With our toolkit for any age, we have 5 days a week with different hosts and guests. On Mondays, we have an exercise expert. On Tuesday, we have Dr. Dana Q&A, who's a psychologist. And then we have Mindful Wellness with Nisha, who does guest hosts and experts, and as well yoga. And we want you to come and feel connected with youth counselor Lindsay as well. So I just want to put that out there. It's a great way for people to connect.
Okay, well, that's really helpful. Did you want to add to that, Julia?
Yeah, no, I think, I think we're also offering groups for adults across the province. The thing that I'm just coming back to though is I do want to acknowledge, and this has come up multiple times, that we have a lot of people in community that actually don't have access to technology. And this isn't saying that, I think we're all trying to find the best way forward and figure out how to help people. And for those people that do have access to that, I absolutely suggest that they access the toolkit and they access the resources that we are making available. But I do think that, like, as a community, we have an opportunity now to think about who's missing from this conversation. And, I think, who doesn't have the technology that they need, who doesn't have access to sufficient food in our community, who doesn't have access to housing. I think we need to be using this opportunity to really think about who's missing, and how can we move forward in a way that isn't just turning back to the status quo, but is really growing from this experience to like fill those gaps and acknowledge that they exist. So I think absolutely, for those of us that do have the benefit and the privilege of those tools, let's go for it, but let's also spend some time thinking about what's missing.
Well, and we're finding that out too with the youth that aren't in school, that, I mean, normally if you don't have access to the technology, go down to the library and get on a computer or whatever. Mm-hmm. But those services are not available. So even the school system is trying to deal with these issues, because not every child has access to a computer, or even if they do have a computer in the house, that computer is being used by mom or dad when they're working. So it is a new way of thinking. And that's one of the reasons why I know Dr. Tony Henry wants to get, at least some of the kids back at school, obviously targeting the vulnerable ones first. And yes, we'll go back to school, but not necessarily in the same way, and staggered hours or different times or whatever, not as many kids. So you're right. I mean, just to think about the ones that are not here in the conversation, because those are the ones that, equally or if not more need these services. I don't know what the answer to that is. I mean, we've got this, what about phone? If you don't have access to a computer, do you have phone and text? I know that the, kids help phone, and I know that, people do have ability to access, the services, crisis line, et cetera, for a phone. Mm-hmm. So what would be your suggestions then, Julia, to when we're moving forward, if we had a, perfect scenario to provide and think about the services that our most vulnerable do not have at this particular point?
So, I mean, what's top of mind for me right now in our community is I'm just seeing a real lack of acknowledgement that people are sleeping outside, and a lot of women are in difficult situations. I think the lack of affordable housing is the starting point, or lack of housing, supportive housing is really the starting point for this conversation. And I'd really like to see a lot more municipal leadership on that piece, because I think it's a partnership between them and BC Housing and other partners to really make that happen. So we are advocating very strongly for that piece. And then I think, really starting to acknowledge the poverty that exists in our society, and thinking about ways to create, services that are essentially accessible. Like when when we do shut down our libraries, everyone who doesn't have a place to live loses their only means of looking up rental properties. Like, so there's all of these compounding issues right now. So, you know, I think it starts with municipal leadership and provincial leadership on that side. And then, you know, we should really sit down and think about, what did we learn from this experience? What are we learning? And how can we address those collectively as a society? And that might involve starting up labs like the universities have, where they are making some computers available to students who don't have them at home, you know. And I know that's a scary proposition right now with, you know, getting out into the community, but I think it's needed. And showers and bathrooms and all of those other pieces are also missing, and they're also needed.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when the measures came forward about, you know, increased hand washing stations in vulnerable areas like the downtown east side. I'm assuming that's also happening in other areas as well. But really, it's not enough. And you're right, you know, having to think about how we can help people and get them housed or fully housed as opposed to underhoused. Yeah, I get that. So does anybody want to delve into we talked about vulnerable community, about specific sources for Indigenous people in our community? I know that I've got here in North Van, we've got 2 First Nations, the Tsleil-Waututh and the Squamish, but certainly across the province, there's all sorts of First Nations people either living in urban centers or on reserve. So perhaps each of you would like to comment on that?
Sure, I'll comment on that, Jane.
Okay.
One of the great things with the Stigma-Free Society is over the last 10 years, we've really reached a provincial height, and our presenters have gone as far as Terrace, Chetwynd, Dawson Creek. I personally presented at a First Nations school for young people. And one of the things that's really happening that's exciting is, like, I know there's these bigger issues of housing and substance use, and I really appreciate that too. But what I really am focusing on with our program has more to do with the wellness in the home. And for those who do have the technology, because the majority of people do. So I still feel that it is quite relevant. I really would like to see, maybe, as you were talking about, government or schools districts supplying computers for young people so they can get the tools and the equipment that they need. It'd be really interesting to see that. But with Indigenous communities, I see a great opportunity here for the online component, because people with our youth wellness toolkit and educators and parents, and like all the way up to Nunavut or up to Prince George, wherever, it has that capability where it's online and it applies everywhere. This isn't just going to be a provincial program, it's also going to be national.
Key or Julia, do you want to comment on that?
I can say that I was on the phone today with some of the Indigenous communities in our region, and they're really struggling with some recent deaths in the community due to overdose. And when I asked what it is that they need at this time, I think they're very worried about people being released back into community without enough support, either from the hospital or from institutions. That whole wraparound care does seem to be missing. And there are some youth that are really, falling through the cracks. And so I think it's a really difficult day for our communities on the North Shore today, because there are 2 passings this week. So I think we need to have the conversation. I think they need to be at this conversation. Hopefully in the future, we can figure out a way to invite them in and ask them.
Well, that's a good idea for next time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Maybe we'll do this again. So
yeah.
We can, increase the fold. Kier, did you want to comment on that? The question was about special sources for Indigenous communities.
Yeah, I guess there has been a little bit of an enhancement as there's been some community responses happening, across the province. The First Nations Health Authority has been enhancing services and supports, particularly as they've been setting up some of these emergency response centres. So again, I've been made aware of those services recently, again, whether folks have been homeless or are now having to be relocated into, to find housing, whether it's been hotels, shelters. It's been pleasing to hear that there's been the offering of elders and cultural supports for those individuals. At Phoenix, we're very fortunate to have a couple of elders that continue to support our clients and those connected for service with us, and amazing Indigenous service providers in the community. So, I think across the board, as we were talking today, that there have been enhancements of services for most groups, including Indigenous groups. It's trying to spread the word. And it's also, the need looks very different depending on, as Andrea says, whether you're housed or whether you're homeless, out in community right now. So it's, but we've just got to find ways to promote and share the services that are coming online. But I was pleased to hear some enhancements in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you all know, that's the continuum of care. So we didn't have it before, and we still don't have it now. And to be able to get people, so if they are accessing at least one part of the system, that to go from one part to the next, not falling through the cracks. And I recognize that we're still we're not quite there yet in this province with regards to the continuum of care. So it's something that we're still having to work for. So I noticed at the time that we've got just 10 minutes, and I do not have any more questions at this particular time, but they could still come. But I thought before we finish, because we've only got 10 minutes, I'd give each of you an opportunity to summarize. Julia, you kind of started on, what we need to do moving forward. I think it's helpful moving forward generally, like even without COVID, but also moving forward after COVID, recognizing that the different services that we're going to need are going to be probably much more greater than they were, even though they were great before, they are now. So perhaps you could inform us, and certainly the folks that are listening will be able to learn that and be able to advocate for those services. And then maybe one last little thing that you might want to give to folks to give them hope and to give them help. So maybe we'll start with Julia and we'll go around.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the thing that we've realized, those of us who work in the mental health sector, I'm sure that Keir and Andrea agree that, and you do as well, Jane, is that we've known that social isolation is a risk factor for our community, and loneliness is very harmful to our health, and we need to create a more connected, integrated society. And so the thing that we're learning right now is when it's gone, we see how valuable it is. And so what we need to do is we need to be investing in, integrated programming like peer support and wraparound care going forward, so that nobody is isolated in the same way that they have been through this process and the same way they were before. And people who were isolated before due to chronic illness or mental illness, they're saying, this is what we've been talking about for so long. So thank goodness the society is starting to catch up and learn these lessons with us. So I think going forward, we need to focus on community connectedness. We need to identify social isolation as harmful, and we need to create programs that support that have a long-term view. So we need counseling long-term. We don't need, 3 months of counseling or 30-minute sessions. We need to invest in that as a community. We need to provide wraparound supports for people that are leaving hospital, leaving institutions, that are leaving, recovery treatment programs, so that we're not releasing people into shelters, we're releasing people into supported environments. So I think those would be the two key things for me, is really around enhancing connectedness. Well, 3 things: improving counseling access, and then supporting wraparound care for people.
Yeah, I did hear that. I talked to a doctor from the downtown east side in the detox, and he got somebody that was back, and he said, what happened? And he said, well, I got discharged to a shelter and people were using in the shelter. So there's a classic example of not catching these folks and getting them into the right care, because they're falling through the cracks in between the different levels of care. Keir, did you want to talk about that as well, or?
Yeah, and before I forget, I want to give a quick shout out to all of our amazing staff that continue to show up to work every day, and really those across the province and the country that, those still having to go to work, and quite frankly, those playing their part and staying at home where it's appropriate to do so. We couldn't continue to operate without our brave staff showing up to work every day and providing the care that's necessary. So didn't want to move on without thanking them. To Julia's comments, definitely echo that. I mean, what we're seeing right now is some of the highlights of strains on our system, or quite frankly, where a continuum doesn't exist. We're seeing, again, around counselling services and things like that. I mean, I think there's been calls for a long time about greater access and ongoing access, and whether that's MSP based or whatnot, that these aren't things that just get brought on in an emergency, that these are things that need to be available and accessible at all times. I want to also sort of remind people that although there have been some slowdown in access to treatment and recovery services, many are, all are open, and many are still taking intakes. And so Phoenix, for instance, we are still accepting intakes and referrals. And we're not alone. I know across the Vancouver coastal system as well, there have been some pressures, but again, please don't see a slowdown as not a reason to connect and try and secure a bed if that's the support that you need. Bigger picture, again, the things I'll always focus on around that continuum of care, is really everything from, that harm reduction to treatment and recovery, the housing, and the ability to sort of move forward and backwards along that continuum as people need. We're not past the overdose crisis. Again, we saw a spike just this past month. So, obviously much of the attention has and needed to move towards COVID, but as we move through this, we haven't got a grip of that other public health emergency yet, and nor the housing crisis. So, I think there's a lot of things we're learning on the fly right now in bringing these, what we thought were emergency measures. I think we're going to realize these aren't emergency measures. They're actually measures that need to be sustained to appropriately care and support some of the most vulnerable, and even just all of residents in our communities.
Yeah, agreed. And I think last week was the 4th year anniversary of the overdose crisis, and the two public health emergencies have now collided. And then maybe, Andrea, you could finish up. You could talk about kids. I know.
I have a couple of things I'd like to say. Yeah.
We need to get more services into the schools as well. We know that for the kids' mental health. So,
it's even beyond that, I feel, and I'd really like to see going forward more partnerships with government and charities, but also charities small and large, and charities partnering with each other. Like, we're partnering with Kids Help Phone. We've partnered with We Charity. We're a very small charity, but we are also working with Foundry. So we're finding ways to create synergies and ways to move forward in a way we never have before, because it is so demanding right now that we do this. I really want to see programs as well that create that connection, the counseling piece, definitely, but they need to be enjoyable, especially engaging in a certain way for young people, for them to use the services. And I also see having these programs being a long-term program as well when COVID moves forward, because the toolkit, for instance, will be a general mental health toolkit for educators in schools once things move forward in that way, when COVID is over eventually, and hopefully. So lastly, I'm really looking forward to the future and to see what kind of innovative solutions that our policymakers have. And thank you so much, Jane, for all of your work around mental health. I really enjoyed being here today.
Well, I really appreciate what all of you, also not just what you're doing on your day-to-day lives, helping folks with their mental health, but also taking the time today to come and be a part of what, I don't know if we'll do this again. We'll see what kind of response we get, but certainly, a good learning experience for me, including the technology part of it. But I think what we've learned is these issues that we're dealing with right now are not emergency issues. We're in an emergency, but the issues that we're dealing with should not be dealt with as an emergency. And that's what I worry about, is that if we're setting a standard of services, please don't take them away. And we should definitely be focusing I believe in all sectors on our mental health, and because mental health affects us all somehow. And
Exactly.
and until, as I said a few years ago, it wasn't really getting the attention that I think that it needs. And I really liked what you also said, Andrea, about partnerships, because nobody can do it all, and everybody's got their expertise, and so we should be trying to do that, I think. And government can't do it all. We all know it can't do it all. But some of the most successful jurisdictions actually have really good partnerships with nonprofits and charities who share the load and can really get the stuff done, because you know that government takes so long to get stuff done. And so the smaller, more nimble organizations can maybe get to need a lot quicker. So unless anybody's got anything else to add, I'd like to thank Nick, my assistant in the office. No, not really in the office, he's at home. Set that up. Yeah, we're all at home. Because we're just getting used to all this Zoom conferencing and stuff. So I just really appreciate what you have said, and I hope that at the end Nick will provide people with your contacts, and certainly contact of your organization and links. I mean, I've been doing this on a regular basis, but we'll do it again. And just to say thank you, and keep up the good work, and it's been a joy doing this with you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you.